Let's dive through this breaking nuclear news. We don't waste time with boring introductions here. First up, price action. The Sprott Uranium Miners ETF was up 8% on the week. The S&P 500 was only up 1.56%. We're going to zoom out a little bit. Let's look at the monthly activity. Sprott Uranium Miners ETF is up 18%, and the S&P 500 is down 3% on the month. There is always a bull market somewhere, and right now it is in uranium. There is a reason we are covering this asset, because it's revolutionary, because there's a supply crunch on the horizon. So let's dive through the news. What is moving this market and what is on the horizon? What do we have to look forward to? First up, this comes from TD Securities Equity Research. We are looking at the cumulative annual term contracting volumes. Term contracting is what the uranium plants do to buy uranium. They enter into long-term contracting with suppliers. And so in the bright red line, you can see where we are as of August 2022, trending way higher than prior years. You can see how seasonal uranium is. The latter half of the year, uranium contracting picks up. It always trends up. And so what we're seeing is that we haven't even entered the seasonally bullish phase for long-term contracting. We've been trending high all year long. The only other years that have come close to beating us so far are 2011 and 2012. And so thinking that the uranium spot price isn't going to reach new highs, especially given the supply crunch we've been in and are in and are expecting, doesn't make much sense at this point, because we are trending high. We're about to enter a massive seasonally bullish time, and we're just getting started. So let's look at this report from the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Let's dive through the data. Obviously, as early stage investors, we want to be in the assets early before the massive bull market happens, before the bullish fundamentals play out. The market's finally waking up to the fact that there's a nuclear renaissance. We've been talking about that for weeks. So let's see, what else does the market still have yet to wake up to? How about the massive overhaul of the US energy grid and the widespread adoption of nuclear energy? First up, let's look at from 2012 to 2021 US electric generation mix by fuel type. In 2012, nuclear was at 20%. In 2021, nuclear was 20%. It's been consistent. What have we seen since that time in other energy sources? We've seen a reduction of coal, a massive increase in natural gas and oil, an increase in wind, and a decrease in hydro, believe it or not, and a very small increase in solar. Now let's dig into that data, because while on the surface it seems like renewables are growing and uranium is flatlining, the reality is a lot different. So let's look at the electric generation mix by state. So sure, right now, Washington is big into hydro, but you can't be big into hydro if you live in Arizona, right? Or New Mexico. And so there's going to be some states that are better than others at this. So in the prior chart, we saw growth in hydro, growth in solar, but not all states are going to be able to use these renewables. For instance, sure, California, 19% solar use. Find me a state that's sunnier than California. I mean, you're not going to get a 19% solar use in Vermont, right? And so let's look at Michigan, for example. They're using 30% nuclear and 33% coal, 26% natural gas and oil. So if they want to greenify their economy, are they going to go to wind? I don't know how windy it is there and how intermittent wind is. And we know how cold the winters are. Are they just going to rely on wind energy? Probably not. 7%. Practically zero solar. And so on a state-by-state picture, you're not going to see widespread renewable adoption across the board. It's all based on geography. So what is the base load power that everything is going to turn to, that those blue coal lines and gray natural gas lines are going to convert to as the economy and energy grid greenifies? It's the big red bars, nuclear. And so sure, don't let the national statistics fool you. You're only seeing solar and wind being adopted in the states that it actually works in. And so we're talking national baseload adoption. There is a reason the US government is going so big into nuclear. One of the biggest reasons is that we are relying way too heavily on the Russian and Eastern governments for our uranium supply. And so they want to bolster domestic production because of this chart, which shows how weak pathetically weak U.S. domestic production is. It's practically at zero. You can see in the gray bar, whereas foreign purchases have gone nowhere but up. Now, the U.S. wants to fill this gap in. They want the gray bar to grow, and they want the blue line to come down. They're dumping billions of dollars into making this happen. It doesn't get more bullish than that when you're investing in a commodity that is scarce above ground. Now, let's not forget, I showed you the chart of how some states are relying more heavily on renewables than others. California was one of them with massive solar reliance, 19%. Well, what is going on in California? California declares grid emergency, raising blackout prospects. How pathetic is this? I mean, the reality is that these countries, these nations are all going to turn to nuclear eventually. That is why California is keeping the Diablo plant reactor open. And so if they want to be another Germany, which is trying to rely on completely intermittent, faulty energy sources like solar, then we're just going to get into the same energy crisis, and we're going to deal with these blackouts. When a state shifts its power grid to rely on weather-dependent and weather-vulnerable, intermittent, unreliable solar and wind instead of 24/7 reliable nuclear energy, what can you expect? This is not the type of environment. It's a very inflationary environment. It's not the time to be playing games with our energy grid. And so that is why they pivoted on the nuclear plant. And that's why the entire world is pivoting on nuclear. Governor Whitmer of Michigan expresses support in reopening Palisades power plant. The nuclear renaissance is underway. Don't let anyone tell you differently. There's a supply crunch going on. We need more demand. It's obvious. That's why uranium stocks are pumping. And I hope you guys are enjoying this bull run. This comes from the Office of Nuclear Energy. This is not some private publication. This is a government report. Okay, they are pushing nuclear in every possible way, for good reason. With approximately $369 billion in climate provisions, the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is the most significant piece of climate legislation in U.S. history. Multiple incentives pave the way for our nuclear energy sector to help ensure energy security and cut U.S. emissions by 40% before the end of the decade. Again, Kansas isn't going to go big on hydro, right? They're going to go big on nuclear. It's a state-by-state story, and the federal government is pushing it now on everyone. So what do we have to look forward to with the Inflation Reduction Act? Just to summarize again, production tax credits for existing reactors. One real IRA game changer for nuclear energy is a production tax credit to help preserve the existing fleet of nuclear plants. This is a big reason why you're seeing states pivot like Michigan and California. Another big reason, not just common sense. There are production tax credits. Incentivizing advanced nuclear deployment. The Inflation Reduction Act also includes several tax incentives for clean energy technologies, including advanced reactors. Taxpayers will be able to choose from a technology-neutral production tax credit, $25 per megawatt hour for the first 10 years of plant operation, or a 30% investment tax credit on new zero-carbon power plants placed into operation in 2025 or after. Finally, high-assay low-enriched uranium. The IRA invests $700 million to support the development of domestic supply chain for high-assay low-enriched uranium. It's all laid out here. Then you have public sentiment. This comes from John Quakes via Eco America. 3 in 5 Americans report support for nuclear power plants producing electricity. You can see how it's grown from 49% in 2018 to 60% in 2022. Population is on board, again, for good reason. We don't want that energy crisis we're seeing in California to go nationwide. Your options with uranium looking set for its own lithium moment. Before we dive into this article, here is a chart of lithium over the last 5 or so years, just absolutely skyrocketing up 400 or 500%. So this article is explaining why uranium is set for the same type of move. Lithium 2 years ago was unloved, then a sudden but completely foreseeable realization that we didn't have enough to feed the EV thematic sparked massive price rises, which encouraged investment, which has now inspired fresh exploration and development. Now all lithium stocks, from the cashed up majors to the small exploration stocks, are loving life, and uranium is clearly in that world right now, or it's getting there. A succession of positive uranium news flowing over the past 12 to 18 months, which we have absolutely been on top of, has experts and industry insiders saying it is a matter of when, not if, uranium has its own lithium moment. In 2021, primary demand from nuclear reactors of 180 million pounds already outstripped supply. by 60 million pounds. This is the supply crunch. This is huge. This is the math. This is everything. Then came the steady stream of news. Nuclear reactors were being built, having lives extended, and coming out of mothballs at record rates all around the world. India, Japan, the EU, China, US, they all want a lot more nuclear. Let's dive into the math of the uranium supply crunch. Take Japan's recent decision to restart its reactors. For example, each reactor uses 250 to 450,000 pounds per year of uranium. They are bringing on 7 new reactors. So that is probably at least 1.5 million pounds per annum of additional demand coming online, which the market maybe hasn't considered at this stage. And all adds up. High demand leads to high prices, which will encourage a flood of capital into the sector. There is a lot of upside room for the current uranium price of $50 per pound. People are talking about $100 per pound. I think that is possible. Let's dive through the nuclear renaissance that's rapidly unfolding. Always bullish news every single week after week after week. China's nuclear industry says it can accelerate expansion plans. We've been covering how China is expanding, massively investing into nuclear infrastructure. Well, now they're talking about accelerating their expansion plans. Target of 6 to 8 reactors a year could be raised to 10. Association advocates bringing more nuclear power inland. So all the demand models you've seen are going to be busted once this massive increase in power demand from China is factored in. And all the increases we've been talking about in demand have not been factored into the previous models. And so the supply crunch is just getting worse and worse. Not to mention that Germany keeps its nuclear plants alive as EU seeks crisis fix. It was pretty much obvious that Germany would move back to uranium unless they wanted some seriously unhappy people, because they're entering winter in the midst of an energy crisis. Now, why are they in the midst of an energy crisis? Because this is the power mix in Europe. They're getting 40% from renewables. Clearly, that is failing them, 24% from nuclear, and then the rest from gas and coal. Maybe the nuclear renaissance will find its way into Europe as well. Maybe they will finally come to their senses like the US has. Now let's cover the biggest risk to the entire story, which is nuclear power safety. We know that by and large, if a nuclear plant is left alone, then it's proven to be extremely safe, probably one of the safest energy generation sources in the world compared to all the others. And so recently, the only threat of a nuclear event is happening because of the first shooting war in Europe in the last 80 years. So we have Russia versus Ukraine, and so they're battling over this nuclear power plant. Ukraine considers shutting nuclear plant after loss of backup power. Yes, they should have shut it down a long time ago. After shelling destroys key electricity supply, the facility might have to rely on generators with 10 days of fuel left. And so we talked about how there's now international watchers in that plant. A neutral party is over there keeping the world posted on what is going on. More good news is that both sides in this conflict are hugely incentivized to keep that plant safe. And so again, we'll stay on top of that. With every great investment, there's always a backdoor risk. In this instance, it's safety. But in the meantime, the nuclear renaissance continues to unfold, and we will be sure to stay on top of it every step of the way.